Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author, and in this video we will be doing a continuation of the same types of documents that we've looked at thus far. This one is from the, with the letterhead of Secretary of Defense, June 1st, 2025, for senior leadership commanders, combatant commands, defense agency, and DoD field activity directors. Subject: Department of Defense civilian employees to support the Department of Homeland Security. This is going to get into the overall project plan being implemented, which is a transition of all military assets, not necessarily speaking military enlisted officers, the individual people taking their oaths of allegiance to the Constitution, but rather the quote-unquote military assets, of which there are many which are not reflected in the usual conventional concept of what a military is. Despite the fact that this says the first person, we will find that this stuff is not being done by one individual, apparently. I am authorizing the detail of Department of Defense DoD civilian employees to the Department of Homeland Security DHS to support its operations at the United States southern border and with internal immigration enforcement. DoD supervisors and civilian employees shall comply with DHS procedures for deployment detail assignments as appropriate. The Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness in coordination with DHS will provide further guidance. And it's signed PB. You can see that. No date, no name, just looks like it was photocopied and signed with a marker, Sharpie, whatever. So what this document is telling us, of course, is something I mentioned in my previous video, which is that most of these are foreigners coming from the United Nations and other aspects, and their primary concern, of course, is to take control of quote-unquote immigration enforcement and immigration control. So that way they are specially privileged from it because they control it, and them themselves being foreigners, it doesn't apply to them because they're in control of it. And that's how they do it. And they're, of course, attorneys writing this paperwork and whatnot from the United Nations, etc. This next one, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, non-reimbursable exchange of liaisons within the National Capital Region. It's an interesting word there, National Capital Region. It's in the capital of a regional capital of name. Yeah, it's a weird name. Detail as defined by DoD. Temporary assignment of military member or DoD civilian employee, that's the operative word there, DoD civilian employee, to perform duties in any agency outside DoD with the intent of returning to DoD upon completion of those duties. With the intent, right? So they're just going to write there what the intent is. But, you know, if that intent just magically and coincidentally is not fulfilled, well, it's just an intent, right? It was intended, but it just didn't happen that way. A detailee as defined by DHS, an employee of one federal agency or department employing agency who, through formal agreement with another federal agency or department gaining agency, is temporarily placed with the gaining agency to perform duties for the gaining agency as defined, blah, blah, blah. For an indefinite period of time, of course. Liaison as defined by DoD, that contact or intercommunications maintained between, well, all that stuff's kind of just meaningless, but a liaison may be a contractor if performing activities such as conveying information that are not inherently governmental. I think we know what that means. A contractor may not represent a department or agency. Liaison officer is a word used here, LNO. I crossed that out because it's not important. This MOU provides guidance for the placement of DoD liaisons during incident response at the DHS Crisis Action Team, CAT. Now, we use the word CAT in the Marine Corps for Counter Armor Team. So it's interesting that they're using that acronym for quote-unquote Crisis Action Team. Ugh. Sounds so serious and important. The DHS National Operations Center Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, National Response Coordination Center, NRCC, the National Infrastructure Coordination Center, and ICC, the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, NCCIC, and other operational nodes as might be required. Oh, well, now they're operational nodes. That's what we're going to call them now. Parties recognize the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and America's Security Affairs. So there's another one of your numerous assistants offices and deputy assistant and all these other stupid moronic titles that they keep coming up with. As the DoD Domestic Crisis Manager. As such, the ASD, HD, and ASA coordinates with the OSD, Principal Staff Assistants, PSA, and the CJCS, that stands for Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to ensure crisis management efforts are coordinated with information management, command and control, continuity, mission assurance, homeland defense activities, defense support of civil authorities, and Western Hemisphere security affairs. Now, one of the important things to notice here is this word, defense support of civil authorities. That is an important word to solidify and identify the operations of transitioning to a global law enforcement structure with the design of making war on the people across the planet, but also specifically, of course, in the United States of America, which is treason against the U.S. Constitution. The other thing about this is that you have to understand that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all these other offices, they will have their quote-unquote legal authorized representative appear, which will, of course, all be licensed attorneys. And they're the ones writing these paperwork and these documents, essentially giving them a cover story for which they can go in and do whatever they want under the guise of this nonsense. The ASD, HD, and ASA will maintain administrative oversight and management of this MOU for DoD. Isn't that nice? Although there is no single DHS official with an aggregate of responsibilities similar in those of the ASD, HD, and ASA, the following individuals collectively are considered the principal DHS senior leaders who engage with DoD on DSCA matters. Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Undersecretary of Homeland Security for National Protection and Programs, Directorate. Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Policy, acting as Undersecretary Equivalent, PLCY. Director, Office of Operations Coordination and Planning, Ops, and Military Advisor to the Secretary of Homeland Security, MIL, which I guarantee you is also a civilian. DHS components may assign and or exchange liaisons with DoD outside the National Capital Region under separate arrangement as long as the arrangement is covered by a signed MOA or MOU, because obviously the MOAs and MOUs are law now. Nothing else is. Just this nonsense. Core representatives of the DoD liaison element serve as the primary liaisons with DHS on matters related to Homeland Defense and DSCA. These core representatives are from the following DoD organizations which maintain a full-time presence at DHS headquarters. Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and America's Security Affairs, OASD, HD, and ASA, North American Aerospace Defense Command and U.S. Northern Command, NNC, and National Guard Bureau. Is that interesting that we have a National Guard Bureau? It's moronic. Pursuant to the DHS CAT concept of operations, CONOPS, and a specific DHS executive order. So this is a Department of Homeland Security executive order. This is not a presidential executive order. Isn't that fun that they're just playing these games with words and acting like that in itself is context enough for, quote, authoritative measures relative to an anticipated or actual crisis event. Right? All right. Relative to an anticipated crisis event. It does say relative to an anticipated or actual crisis event, but simply that it is an anticipated crisis event is sufficient. They're anticipating it, and therefore that's fine. The DHS CAT will activate at DHS headquarters or the DHS alternate site. So if they anticipate it, they will quote-unquote activate this DHS CAT, whatever the hell that thing is, at DHS headquarters. And this is as I said before, this is a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, regarding liaison within the National Capital Region. Anyway, or DHS alternate site. They might also activate at a DHS alternate site. The entire DoD liaison element at DHS will be notified of DHS CAT activation via the DHS Emergency Notification System, ENS. And DoD liaisons will respond to perform liaison duties at the DHS CAT as needed based on the nature, scope, severity, or magnitude of the event, which, of course, as I said before, might just be anticipated. The intent of this liaison activity is to help provide the Secretary of Homeland Security and the liaison's parent organization with the timely and accurate information concerning DoD support that has been provided or that may be needed in response to the event. Well, that's the intent of it anyway, right? That's their declared intent, not their actual intent, of course. Defense Logistics Agency, DLA liaison to FEMA. That's a big deal. I've had workings with the Defense Logistics Agency, and they actively sabotage, obstruct, and cause issues within the logistics of the military apparatuses and against uniformed military personnel. And they're run by these holier than thou, arrogant civilian. Think an example would be something simple like the disposal of hard drives for any office that uses them has to get the signature of a person, and I mean has to, in order to get it disposed of at the disposal facility, they have to get the signature of this person who may or may not have been on vacation their entire time in the office, and then obviously when they don't get disposed of because everything else was got rid of except these hard drives, which this person refused to sign because they were quote unquote never in their office, because they were always on vacation or something. Well, then they decide to come there and give a lecture and a presentation on how to appropriately fill out the paperwork. And that's how these people act. So the fact that there's a Defense Logistics Agency liaison to FEMA is not a surprise, which of course means that when their anticipated crisis event happens, they'll funnel all the military asset resources, Humvees, tanks, airplanes, rockets, explosives, well, whatever it is, they will funnel that to FEMA. Engages FEMA on DLA capabilities, provides situational awareness to the director DLA. There is no change to the existing processes, protocols used by FEMA to issue mission assignments to DLA, ensure effective implementation of the interagency agreement between DLA and FEMA, which allows direct commodity support to FEMA. Exactly what I just said. And in anticipation of or during an event such as a hurricane, FEMA may transition from steady state operations to incident response operations. To coordinate the overall federal response, FEMA activates the NRCC in response to the NRCC request for assistance. The ASD, HD, and ASA in his or her role as the principal civilian advisor to the Secretary of Defense, SecDef, for DSCA may recommend that SecDef increase the number of liaisons in the DoD Core liaison element at FEMA. May recommend that SecDef. Sounds like this person, of course, is doing whatever they want under the cover of being a quote directly reporting. The ASD, HD, and ASA will make such a recommendation in close collaboration with joint staff in the DoD entity from which support is being requested. DoD components should be prepared to provide the following capabilities in response to a request from the NRCC. Liaison to the Transportation and Movement Coordination Group. During large-scale response operations where DoD mobility capabilities may be required, FEMA may request transportation planners to support T and MCG efforts. Planners are normally sourced by the geographic combatant command affected by and or responding to the disaster. DLA will serve as a core member of the TNMCG. Interesting stuff. DoD will provide facility access, office space, related equipment, and administrative support to DHS liaisons at the Pentagon and other component locations equivalent to that which would be provided to DoD personnel of equivalent grades. There's your transition to global law enforcement, quote unquote, This support will be commensurate with the duties to be performed by DHS liaison and include, but is not limited to, as appropriate, badging and credentialing, information technology, hardware and access, classified information storage, and administrative necessities. So yeah, we're just going to take it over so that we can use this on the people. The individuals assigned to DHS positions that are set forth in subparagraphs A1 and to A3 above are each individually referred to by DHS as an advisor. They share similar roles and responsibilities to one another within their designated DoD organizations or assignments. Appendix C to this MOU provides a description of the roles and responsibilities of DHS advisors assigned to advise DoD. Advise, of course, they're using in the defined term that most people would use the word direct or control. They're using the word advise in place of those words, which then in this context become synonyms. Of course, then that means that they have redefined naturally the word advise to mean something else. Points of contact within DoD. Point of contact for this MOU is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense Integration and Defense Support of Civil Authorities. That is a ridiculous title. DASD, HDI, and DSCA. Within DHS, the point of contact for this MOU is DHS MIL. DHS MIL. What a joke. Now, these allegedly were signed in 2013. They could, of course, easily have been backdated because these people are not above that. The names are Ashton B. Carter, Deputy Secretary of Defense. That's not a thing. And Rafael Boris, Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, which, of course, is even worse. He's an acting deputy secretary. It's moronic. Signed in September 10th, 2013 and October 22nd, 2013. Allegedly. And here we got this ridiculous graph in the back of descriptions of DoD liaison positions at DHS, which is all just a bunch of gobbledygook, and their relative rank structure as compared to uniformed and non-uniformed DoD personnel, of course, so-called DoD personnel. FEMA Independent Study Program we've got here, DoD Liaison Training. Here we've got these university-sounding courses. IS 453, Introduction to Homeland Security Planning Online. 2, Homeland Security Homeland Defense Planners Course, Basic National Planners Course, Train the Trainer National Planners Course, Planning Team Leader National Planners Course, and Executive Level National Planners Course. Defense Support of Civilian Authorities, DSCA Phase 1 is a distance learning course offered by the Department of Defense that introduces statutes, directives, plans, command, and control relationships and capabilities with regard to DoD support for domestic emergencies. This includes information applicable to the national, state, local, and DoD levels. DSCA Phase 1 can be found in the Joint Knowledge Online JK Learning Management System. DSCA Phase 2 is a resident interactive course focused on intergovernment and interagency response. DSCA Phase 1 is prerequisite. For more information, visit blah blah blah. Military Resources and Emergency Management IS-75 provides participants with an overview of U.S. military resources potentially available to assist civilian authorities, including the procedures for obtaining and integrating military resources into disaster response and recovery operations. Of course, as I said before, they are in fact anticipating a crisis event, quote unquote. The next video that I will do will involve the cybersecurity type of stuff, and a couple other things. Of course, it's all going to fall in line with the movement of quote-unquote military assets to quote-unquote law enforcement. Of course, we also have some interesting things like the movement of Naval Station Guantanamo Bay to DHS, or Department of Homeland Security control, and we also have this program for quote anti-terrorism and force protection. Those will be interesting. Some other research I need to do, which will be involved with this, is this kind of e-warrant system they've been talking about with something called Cloud Gavel and a few other things. This e-warrant and leads system is a automated mechanism, a computer program, if you will, to be leveraged against regular people on an automated basis. So basically everything is automated and controlled, including the so-called law enforcement, of which they want to remove any risk through their anticipated crisis event and transition to this New World Order plan.